Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Positive Proof Podcast. I'm your host, Parmis Najmi, and I'm so glad that you're here. If you want to listen to more episodes like this one on self-improvement, mindset, and wellness, go ahead and hit that follow button to join the family. Before I get into today's episode, I just want to ask you guys for a quick and kind favor, and that is if you haven't yet left a review, I would absolutely appreciate if you could do so. It helps so much to build this podcast and help it grow so that we can increase the positive impact we make and just overall make it a bigger community. Also, if you are looking for daily motivation, follow me on Instagram at Positive Proof Podcast, where I post behind the scenes content and daily quotes that serve as sweet daily reminders. And if anyone is wondering how to leave episode requests, you can actually send me your thoughts via the DM me your thoughts link in the description or via Instagram DM as well. Today's episode is one of those topics that honestly changed everything for me when I started understanding it, not just intellectually, but somatically, emotionally, in real life. We're going to be talking about how to rewire your brain to work for you instead of against you. And I know that might sound a little bit dramatic, but hear me out, because if you've ever felt like you keep falling into the same emotional loops or habits or behaviors, this episode is for you. And more importantly, this episode is about reminding you that your brain is not broken. You are not broken. You are just wired in a way that reflects your past, and that wiring can be changed. Now, what I love about this topic is that it's not just mindset. It's not just, think positive or journal your way to clarity. It's actually neuroscience. It's emotional memory. It's learning how to work with the patterns your brain and body already have so that you can gradually shift them toward the version of you that you know you're capable of being. Because here's the reality. Most of us are operating from mental and emotional patterns that were honestly built years ago, some even decades ago. And they didn't come out of nowhere. They came from repetition, from past experiences, from emotional imprints that your brain interpreted as truth, simply because they were familiar. And then those thoughts became beliefs. And those beliefs became behaviors, and those behaviors became your identity. So if you've ever found yourself asking, why do I keep doing this? Or why do I shut down when I'm trying to grow? The answer isn't because you lack willpower. It's because your brain is wired for what's familiar, not necessarily for what's fulfilling. But the magic is that wiring isn't permanent. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. I'm going to break down the rewiring process into 5 layers, 5 lenses to help you understand how your brain learns, stores, and repeats behavior, and how you can begin to shift those patterns from the inside out. We're going to first talk about how your brain is wired for survival and not fulfillment. This is the baseline most of us are operating from without even knowing it. Then we're going to explore repetition, so how what you think, feel, and say over and over again becomes your internal reality. Not because it's true, but because your brain is efficient. Then we're going to look at the emotional layer of beliefs. So how they're stored in your body and why you can't logic your way out of something your nervous system still believes. Then we're going to zoom into what I call micro habits, the little tiny choices no one sees, but that make all the difference when it comes to long-term change. And finally, we're going to talk about identity. So how your self-image is the thermostat of your brain and how you can start becoming someone new by aligning your actions with your future and not your past. And don't worry, this won't be some overwhelming list of things to do. I'm not here to throw a bunch of information at you and then leave you wondering what to do with all of it. I want this to feel accessible, compassionate, and most of all, very doable, even if you're in a season where your energy is low or your confidence feels a little bit shaky. Because the truth is, rewiring your brain isn't about becoming someone else. It's about coming back to the version of you that isn't living in reaction to past pain. It's about unlearning what's been practiced for too long and gently rehearsing something new, something softer, something stronger and more aligned. Now, before we begin, quick poll check-in for those of you tuning in on Spotify. I want you to scroll down and let me know, do you think who we are, so our thoughts, beliefs, even personality, is mostly shaped by our genes and environment, or do you believe it's chemical and that we can change it anytime we decide to? Let me know in the poll down below. Now let's dive in. Starting off with the first section, your brain is wired for survival and not fulfillment. We're going to start here because I think a lot of us carry this subtle self-blame when we notice we keep falling into the same patterns. Like, why do I keep procrastinating? Why do I freeze in moments where I want to speak up? Why do I shut down when I'm trying to be more open? And it's easy to jump to the conclusion that something's wrong with us, that, we're lazy or broken, not wired for growth. But the truth is, nothing's actually wrong with you. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep you alive, avoid discomfort, and repeat what feels familiar. It's not wired for your highest self. It's wired for your safest self. And those two things don't always look the same. Your brain's default setting, especially the part called the amygdala, which manages fear and survival, doesn't really care if you're fulfilled or inspired or even expanding into your potential. It cares if you're safe. It wants to keep you in the zone that it knows, even if that zone includes self-doubt, overthinking, playing small. If it's familiar, it feels safe, which means from a biological standpoint, it feels right, even if it's the very thing that's holding you back. I'll give you a personal example. There was a time where I would catch myself pulling back from opportunities that I said I wanted, like I'd plan to show up more online or pitch myself to someone I admired or even just speak up about something I believed in, and then I'd find a reason not to do it, like it's not the right time or I need to feel more ready, and I'd convince myself that it was logic. But looking back, it really was not logic. It was my nervous system running a protection script. And once I started understanding that, everything shifted because I stopped labeling it as self-sabotage and started recognizing it as self-preservation. I wasn't fighting me. I was fighting an old part of me that believed visibility equals danger or rejection equals abandonment. And when you think about it from that lens, of course your brain is going to default to what it knows. Most of our mental patterns are built in our early years when our nervous system is just trying to figure out what the world is and how we fit into it. So if you learned through experience or observation that it's safer to stay quiet or easier to not try than to fail, or that love is earned through perfection, your brain stored those lessons, not to punish you, but to protect you. So let's pause and just sit with that for a second. Your brain isn't working against you. It's just still working with outdated instructions. That's really it. It's like having an old GPS that keeps rerouting you based on roads you don't even drive on anymore. And you're sitting there thinking, why do I keep ending up in the same place? But it's because the system hasn't been updated yet. And here's where the empowerment starts. The brain is completely trainable. That is the beautiful part. You are not locked into the default. Your neural wiring isn't concrete. It's adaptable. It just needs new input, and not once in a while, but over and over and over again. Gently, consistently, like showing a scared animal that the world is actually safer than it thought. So when you catch yourself reacting in the same old ways, snapping at your partner when you're triggered, or spiraling into worst case scenarios, or shutting down instead of speaking up, I want you to try this. Instead of judging yourself, try thanking your brain. Literally say, hey, I see what you're doing. I know that you're trying to protect me, but we're safe now. It sounds cheesy, I know, but the moment that you stop fighting your brain and start working with it, your energy shifts. You create space to respond instead of react, to guide instead of judge. Because here's the thing, your brain isn't the villain of your story. It's the loyal assistant who just hasn't realized you've outgrown the old job description. And when you show up with that patience and consistency, it learns. It really, really does. So this is why awareness is the first step. Before we get into the rewiring and the repetition and all that juicy stuff, we need to notice what our brains are doing and why. Because if you skip that step, you're just layering affirmations or mindset hacks on top of unconscious resistance. So the next time you feel stuck, don't ask what's wrong with me. Ask yourself, what is my brain trying to protect me from right now? That question alone opens the door to everything else. Moving on to section number 2, repetition creates reality. One of the most powerful truths I've learned, and I wish I had known this sooner, is that your brain literally builds itself around what you repeat. I don't just mean the habits you do or the words you say out loud. I mean the thoughts that you keep coming back to, the emotions that you rehearse, the beliefs you revisit every time something goes wrong. Every time you think a thought, a group of neurons in your brain fire together. That's how neural circuits work. Neurons that fire together wire together. So if you keep thinking, I'm not good enough, or I'll probably mess this up, over and over, even passively, you are strengthening that neural pathway. You are literally reinforcing a physical structure in your brain that makes that thought easier to access next time. And that's what most people don't realize. Your thoughts aren't just invisible mental noise, they're physical events. They're biochemical reactions that cause neurons to fire in patterns. And the more you revisit those patterns, the more automatic they become. That's what a belief really is. A thought that you've repeated so many times, consciously or not, that your brain turns into a default setting. It doesn't even ask if it's true anymore. It just assumes this is who I am, this is how life works, and this is what I can expect. It's all pattern. It's all familiarity. And here's where the emotional part comes in. Your brain doesn't just wire based on what you think, it also wires based on how intensely you feel those thoughts. When a thought triggers an emotion like shame, anxiety, fear, your body gets involved. You release stress hormones, you feel it in your gut or your chest, and now your entire nervous system is reinforcing the same mental loop. So the cycle becomes this: thought, emotion, reinforcement, repetition, belief, and then identity. And by the way, repetition is always happening. Your brain is always rewiring itself every day. The only question is, what are you wiring in? Most of us are doing it unconsciously. We repeat what we were taught. We replay what we've heard others say about us. We rehearse failure or rejection in our heads because we think we're preparing for it. But really, we're just training our brain to expect it. And when you do that long enough, your brain becomes efficient. It starts pulling those same thoughts up automatically because that's what it knows. That's what it's familiar with. You don't even have to try anymore. It just becomes who you are. I used to do this with a belief that I was really bad at finishing things. It wasn't something I said out loud all the time, but it was this quiet narrative that I had on repeat. Like I would start a new project, feel excited for a bit, and then the minute it got hard or unfamiliar, I'd stop showing up. And the voice in my head would kick in like, see, I told you, you never follow through. But here's what I didn't understand back then. That pattern wasn't proof of who I was. It was just a very well-rehearsed neural loop. One I had unknowingly strengthened for years, and if I wanted to change it, I couldn't wait for some big burst of motivation or self-worth to drop from the sky. I had to practice a new loop. And that's where real rewiring begins, by choosing a new thought and rehearsing it enough times that your brain starts recognizing it as familiar. Not necessarily true right away, just possible. Like instead of I never finish anything, I started introducing softer, slightly upgraded statements like I'm someone who's learning how to finish, or this is a skill I can build, not a flaw in who I am, or my brain just needs practice staying with hard things. At first, my brain did resist it because new pathways are weak in the beginning and they're like trails in a forest that haven't been walked yet. They're not the obvious route. You have to deliberately choose them. But every time you think the new thought, especially if you combine it with a calming or empowering emotion, you strengthen the signal. And that's the science of it. The more you use a neural pathway, the more myelin your brain wraps around it. Myelin is like insulation for electrical signals. It makes the path faster, stronger, and more automatic, which means the next time you're in a similar situation, your brain is more likely to reach for the new response than the old one. And that's what repetition does. It doesn't just change your mindset, it changes your biology. So here's the takeaway. If you've been telling yourself the same disempowering story for years, you are not stuck with it. You've just practiced it. And you can now practice something new. It starts with noticing the old loop, interrupting it, and giving your brain a new phrase. a new pattern, a new possibility to work with. And yes, it's going to feel very unfamiliar at first, and that's okay. That's really not a sign that it's not working. It's a sign that your brain is learning. And the more you repeat the new response, especially when paired with emotion, the faster it becomes your new normal. Because repetition doesn't lie. It builds reality, one thought, one feeling, and one loop at a time. Moving on to the next section, old beliefs are emotional, not just logical. This is something I wish more people understood, especially those of us who tend to beat ourselves up for not thinking differently fast enough. The beliefs that hold you back aren't just thoughts stuck in your head. They are emotional patterns stored in your body, which means you can't always think your way out of them. And that's why it can be so frustrating. You might logically know something isn't true anymore, like I'm not unlovable or I don't need to prove myself to be worthy, but it still feels true deep down, especially in high stress or emotionally charged moments. You find yourself reacting from that old version of you, not because you believe it with your mind, but because your nervous system still recognizes it as familiar. And here's what's happening neurologically. When you repeat a thought for long enough, especially one that's paired with a strong emotional experience, it gets stored not just in your brain, but in your body's stress memory. Your brain fires the neurons, yes, but your body feels the hormones and chemicals that come with it. And when those two experiences happen together often enough, your brain-body system says, this must be who we are. So if you grew up in an environment where love felt conditional, or where your voice wasn't respected, or where mistakes were punished instead of supported, your brain didn't just take notes. It internalized it, and your body followed. It learned, this is how I need to be in order to stay safe. That's the emotional coding behind a belief. That's why beliefs like I'm too much, or I always mess things up, or people leave when I'm honest aren't just random. They're survival based. They came from somewhere. They served a function, and until they're rewired, your system will keep choosing them, not because they're empowering, but because they're predictable. And our brains love the predictable because in biological terms, predictability equals survival. So this is where rewiring goes deeper than affirmations or journaling, as helpful as those tools are. You have to work with your emotional body, not just your conscious mind. And a good way to start is to ask yourself, what are the emotions I habitually feel? Not just on bad days, but, on average. Like, what does my nervous system spend the most time in? For a lot of people, the answer is something like anxiety or shame, pressure, or even numbness. And those aren't just moods, they're memorized states. Your body is so used to operating in that emotional frequency that it starts craving it, expecting it, even when your external circumstances change. This is where you might catch yourself thinking, why am I reacting like this? I thought I already worked on this. But that reaction is just an echo of an older identity, a self that learned to survive through those emotions. So what do you do from here? You disrupt the pattern by introducing a new emotional state, not by force, but by practice. For example, if your default state is anxiety, you don't just tell yourself, I'm calm now. You train calmness. You practice slowing your breath, releasing tension, grounding in your senses. You teach your body what safety feels like. Because here's what the science says. You really cannot create a new future from the emotional frequency of your past. If you want to rewire your beliefs, you have to pair new thoughts with the new feelings. This might mean taking just 2 minutes a day to generate the emotion of trust, or gratitude, or self-respect. And you don't have to fake it. You just have to activate it consciously and consistently, even if it's just for a little while. And when you do, something incredible happens. Your body starts to learn, oh, this is what it feels like to believe something new. The thought becomes believable because the feeling matches it. And that's when the rewiring locks in. So let me give you a really simple example. If I used to believe that I'm not safe to be vulnerable, and every time I tried to open up, I felt tightness in my chest or, fear in my voice or shame flooding my system, that's the emotional loop reinforcing the belief. But if I start creating moments, even small ones, where I open up and stay grounded, where I feel even a little safe, a little calm, my nervous system starts building a new association. Vulnerability doesn't have to mean danger anymore. It can mean connection, safety, freedom. That's the aim. That's what rewiring looks like on an emotional level. You don't erase the old beliefs with logic. You outgrow it by giving your brain and body a new option, a new memory, a new feeling to work with. And that's something you get to build every single day, not through perfection, but through small, repeated acts of emotional courage. So if you've been stuck in a belief that logically makes no sense, but still controls your life, that's not failure. That's just your body still catching up. And the good news is, with enough intention, you can teach it something entirely new. Moving on to the next section, micro moments are everything. If you've ever felt like change is this huge, overwhelming project that you need to tackle all at once, I want you to pause right there. One of the biggest mindset shifts I've ever had is realizing that rewiring your brain doesn't happen in big dramatic moments. It happens in the tiny, barely noticeable ones, the micro moments that feel insignificant in the moment, but over time shape the entire direction of your life. So let's bring this back to how the brain works for a second. Your brain is constantly scanning for cues every moment. It's collecting information about what's safe, what's expected, what's familiar. And in any situation, especially when you're slightly uncomfortable, it's searching its internal archive for how you've reacted before. If historically you've shut down when criticized or spiraled when plans changed or gone silent when something upset you, that's the pathway that your brain will default to. Because the brain's goal is efficiency, not growth, not alignment, just what's the fastest path to certainty. This is why real transformation often feels so subtle at first. It's not about becoming a whole new person overnight. It's about catching the moment you're about to default and choosing differently, even if it's just 10% different. So here's a real example. Let's say your usual pattern is people pleasing. You're in a conversation where someone's subtly crossing your boundary and every cell in your body wants to smile and say, "It's fine." That's your neural pattern. That's the trained response. But if in that moment, even with your heart racing, you take a small, tiny pause and say, "Actually, I'd prefer not to," or "I need to think about it," that's the micro moment of rewiring. It's tiny, yes, but biologically it matters because you just chose a new signal for your brain to encode. You just sent a message to your nervous system that says, this is safe now. This is who we are becoming. And the more you do that, the easier it gets. Why? Because you're reinforcing a new circuit. You're literally teaching your brain to stop firing the old route and instead build strength in the new one. This is what's called synaptic pruning. It's the process where the brain starts letting go of old, unused connections and strengthens the ones that you actually use. So every time you practice a new emotional response, even in a small way, you are feeding that neural pathway. You're giving it attention, oxygen, life. And when you don't feed the old reaction, when you pause before over-explaining, when you stay silent instead of snapping, when you choose self-compassion instead of shame, you are letting that old wiring start to finally dissolve. That's the work. It's not flashy and it's not Instagrammable, but it is incredibly powerful. And here's what makes it even more sustainable. You don't have to wait for the big moments to rewire your brain. You can practice it in everyday life. When you're driving, when you're brushing your teeth, when you're scrolling, just ask yourself, what emotional state am I in right now? Am I reinforcing the version of me that I want to become? Is this thought pattern familiar or is it intentional? And again, this doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. There's no reward for catching every moment. What matters is that you start to notice, that you catch yourself even 1 second sooner than you did yesterday, because that's progress. That is plasticity in motion. And I'll be honest, some of the most powerful rewiring moments I've ever had happened when really no one was watching, like choosing to respond with kindness when I could have been petty, or staying with a hard task for 5 more minutes instead of giving up, or talking myself down from a spiral instead of fueling it with overthinking. Those are the choices that shift your identity. Because the more often you act in alignment with the person you want to become, the more your brain rewires itself to support that version of you. Not just cognitively, but emotionally and biologically. Your brain says, okay, this is who we are now. Let's make this easier next time. And slowly but surely, it does become easier. You're not faking it anymore suddenly. You're not performing confidence or self-trust or boundary setting. You're building it one moment at a time. So if you ever feel like change isn't happening fast enough or like you're stuck in the same loop, I want you to zoom in. Don't ask, why am I still like this? Ask yourself, where can I make a 5% shift today? Because those 5% shifts done daily, they compound. And in 6 months or a year or even 3 years, you won't just be thinking different thoughts, you'll be living from a different wiring, a different reality. Moving on to the last section, identity is the final layer of rewiring. So we've talked about neural patterns, emotional loops, and the power of micro moments, but here's where it all comes together. The deepest layer of rewiring isn't just about what you think or even what you feel, it's about who you believe that you are. Because your brain is constantly working to stay congruent with your identity. It wants alignment. So if deep down you believe I'm inconsistent, or I'm always anxious, or I'm just not a confident person, then your brain, no matter how many new habits or thoughts you try, will find a way to return to that baseline. That identity becomes the thermostat, and the moment you try to rise above it, your system kicks in and pulls you right back down. And here's the thing. The identity wasn't chosen. It was rehearsed. It was built over time through repetition, emotion, environment, and feedback. You absorbed it. You didn't declare it. And that means you can unlearn it. So let's take a very simple example. Say you want to become someone who follows through. If your identity is still rooted in, I never finish things, then anytime you try to build consistency, your brain's like, hey, this isn't us, this isn't safe. So it'll offer you thoughts like, what's the point? Or you'll fall off soon anyways. Not because it's trying to sabotage you, but because it's trying to protect the identity you've unconsciously reinforced. And this is why so many people struggle with change that actually sticks, because they're trying to create new results from an old self-image. But real lasting rewiring happens when you stop working toward a new identity and start working from a new one. That's the shift from I'm trying to become to this is who I am now. And no, that doesn't mean faking it. It means practicing new behavior that supports a new self-concept and then proving it to your brain with evidence. One choice, one response, and one moment at a time. So when I first started shifting my identity in certain areas, whether it was becoming more emotionally grounded, more visible in my work, or more disciplined, it felt awkward, I'm not going to lie, because my brain still identified with a version of me who avoided conflict, who second-guessed everything, who only showed up when she felt 100% ready. That version was familiar, but she wasn't where I wanted to live anymore. So I had to start asking better questions. Not just what do I want to do, but who do I want to be? And then, asking, how does she think? How does she speak to herself? What does she tolerate or not tolerate in her environment? Because once I had that very clear image, I could start rehearsing her, not just in my head, but in real life, even if it was subtle. Like speaking up when I normally would have swallowed my words, or going to bed early because I was someone who valued energy and clarity, not because I had a rule about it. It's in those decisions that identity starts to shift. Not because someone labeled you differently, but because you started showing up differently. And your brain, over time, took the hint. Now, here's what science tells us about this. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to guess what kind of person you are based on your past behavior. So when you start showing up as someone who sets boundaries or handles stress with more grace or follows through on your goals, it starts updating its file on you. It starts predicting that this is who you are now. And that's when things start to lock in, because you're not just trying to behave differently, you're being differently. So if you're on a rewiring journey and it feels like you're constantly falling off track, pause and ask, am I still identifying with the old version of me? And if the answer is yes, that's okay. Awareness is power. It means you're just ready to pivot. So try this practice. Every morning for a week, I want you to ask yourself, who do I want to embody today? What's one action that would reinforce that identity? And what would that version of me not entertain anymore? This is how we create new baselines, not by waiting to feel like someone new, but by living as someone new before the evidence shows up. Because here's the final truth. Identity isn't static. It is completely fluid and it follows your attention. The more time you spend nurturing the future version of you, the one who's grounded and creative, confident, regulated, the more your brain adapts to make that version your new default. And that's the real rewiring. Not just changing your thoughts, but changing the self that your thoughts are anchored to. So if you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. You are not your patterns. You are not your past, and you are not the wiring your brain created just to keep you safe. You are allowed to change. And not just in theory, but biologically, emotionally, and consciously. Your brain is capable of learning new patterns. Your body is capable of letting go of old ones. And your identity, that gets to evolve too. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be intentional. One thought at a time, one response at a time, and one moment of self-trust at a time. So maybe ask yourself, what version of me am I rehearsing today? And is she aligned with the future I want to live in? Remember, you are rewiring, you are becoming, and you are more capable than you've ever been taught to believe. If this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it or send it to someone who's on their own healing path. And to everyone who made it this far, I appreciate you so much, and I can't wait to chat with you again in next week's episode. Lots of love, Parmis.